Welcome back to our final session of day one. We've got a bumper session for you, and we're going to be looking at how to capitalize on an open vendor ecosystem. So I see that you're grabbing your coffees and getting back to your tables. That's fantastic. So while you do that, let me give you a little bit of preamble. This whole session assumes that there is an open vendor ecosystem. I'm sure we'll challenge that at the beginning of our discussion. We've all been seeing an accelerated move towards openness over the past few years. And of course, the term itself, open, is open to a number of interpretations. It's got a lot of meanings. We'll investigate those as well. And whilst Open RAN is grabbing a lot of the headlines at the moment, it's not the only example. Now, coupled with the continuing trend of hardware and software disaggregation, this is resulting in a potentially and hopefully larger and more innovative and more democratic ecosystem of suppliers and developers, one which should result in a lot of new opportunities for network operators. But what we're going to be asking ourselves is this emerging ecosystem getting the support that it really needs from the telcos? Has it developed as expected? Or is it falling short of the mark? And surely such an ecosystem is going to be absolutely critical to the development of DSPs. So, lots to talk about. Now that you're all settled down, we'll kick off. But before we do anything at all, we shall look at the poll question that we're going to be setting for everybody. As you all know by now, there's a different poll for every session. And here are the options we are giving you all. What do telcos and suppliers most want from an open vendor ecosystem? The 7 choices there, whichever ones you think are important, just click and tick those ones. You can click and tick as many as you think are applicable. And we'll take a look at the results at the end of the panel. You all know in the room there's a QR code on the table, and you've probably all been to the website, so that's all okay. So why don't we start by introducing our guests? I'm going to start on my far left with Klaus Martini, who is co-founder of the Telecom Ecosystem Group. Next to Klaus, Adrian Scrase, who is Chief Technology Officer at Etsy. Next to Adrian, Neil McRae, Managing Director, Architecture and Technology Strategy and Chief Architect at BT. And swiveling across to my right, on my near right, Rahul Chandra, who is Vice President, Global 5G Business Development with NEC. Then we have a return appearance for Danielle Royston, who is founder and CEO of TelecomTV. And on the extreme right, a welcome to Yago Tenorio, who is fellow and network architecture director at Vodafone Group. Apologies, Yago, for that complete mess up I made of that introduction. I'm very, very sorry. Plus, joining us remotely, as you may see very soon, if you bring her on the screen, is Ildiko Vansha, who is Senior Manager, Community and Ecosystem with the Open Infrastructure Foundation. Now, Ildiko wasn't able to get here in person, but she is joining in and she is live with us. Post-pandemic travel disruptions continue, and it's left Ildiko sleepless in Seattle. But welcome, Ildiko. We'll get to you very, very soon. We've also got contributing insights from Singapore. Mark Chong, Group Chief Technology Officer at Singtel, spoke to us last week, and we got some insights from Mark. Right, to start our session off, I would very much like to invite Yago Tenorio from Vodafone to go to the lectern and present our DSP address for this final session of today.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Guy. So this is about capitalizing on open vendor ecosystems, and you already threw the challenge. Is there or is there not an open vendor ecosystem? And I think you mentioned that Open RAN is grabbing all the headlines. Rightly so. It's also the lion's share of the operator's wallet anyway, so that's probably the reason why it's grabbing all the headlines. But it's not the only thing that is happening, that is true. So there are more disaggregated software and hardware elements that are happening in the network. But the truth is, operators, we're learning how to do this with Open RAN. So let me tell you where we are, in particular at Vodafone with this, and then we can debate if there is or there isn't an open vendor ecosystem. So a little earlier this year, in January, we announced the first site up of our UK rollout that is ongoing. The project is going well, it's going as per the plan, which is good news. We've been working on it for longer than a year. The next milestone we're working on is actually to take Open RAN to a urban area, and that includes massive MIMO. The question that I get asked more often is whether the technology is mature enough to be taken into urban environment and to deliver massive MIMO. So I hope it is, because we're doing it later this year, and you will see it, right? And I think also this time next year, we'll probably be talking about an integration of different vendor massive MIMO into the software. We announced the vendors last year, so I think you know all of them. Now, the other thing that's going on, we said in Mobile World Congress that by the end of this decade, 30% of our network in Europe will be Open RAN. Now, you may think that that is a long shot away because it's 2030. But it's not actually, because for that to be true, we need to commence rollout in 2025 or earlier. And for the rollout to start in 2025, we should have, the vendor award finished in 2024, which means procurement should start very soon. So it may look like a long distance future, but for us, it's something that we are actually working on very much as we speak. Now, 30% of our network to Open RAN in Europe is something material. And as I said before, we're not thinking on maybe giving the 30% most rural network to Open RAN. No, that's not what we're thinking. We're thinking on giving a fair share of everything. So that will include 30% of cities as well. Now, in terms of prospects, I think personally, from what I see and what I see on the vendor, what I see from TIP, I think that probably 2023 will be the year in which we start seeing massive rollout happening, I think globally. And in terms of prospects, I also think that in 5 years, Open RAN has the potential to probably deliver a 30% reduction in total cost of ownership. Now, that is subject to, a few things happening. The first thing is we probably need to improve the silicon landscape, and that is why we also announced a little earlier this year that we were opening a semiconductor R&D center in Malaga, in Spain, that is dedicated to the development of silicon for Open RAN. The second thing is we need to actually unleash the innovation that Open RAN is supposed to be attracting. And the third one is we need to get system integration right. On that note, earlier today, we actually published a white paper describing what we learned so far about system integration of Open RAN and what we think that as an industry we should be doing with a call for action. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So with all that, I really think that Open RAN will be delivering pretty much the supplier diversity that we were looking for. Now, will that attract more democracy or not? I'm not sure. I've been thinking about the democratization point, which is a good point. It could be that more suppliers is a more democratic system, but to me, I think that what needs to be democratized is the connectivity, or like to give our customers the control in terms of their own coverage, which is a different point and is more, into the whatever vision, potential. So we've been talking about macro, Open RAN in the macro environment and what is going to actually mean for an operator, which is pretty much linear in a way, so it's the deployment that we've always done in a different way. Now, will Open RAN open new ways of rolling out coverage? I brought you one thing I want to show you. Chan, 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 chan. This is a 2G network running on a Raspberry Pi. It's got a BTS on it, a BSC, an MSC, an HLR, and a signaling gateway. And it's all running on a Raspberry Pi. Now, on the other side, which is the non-sexy side, because it's covered, there is an SDR chip. So it's a software-defined radio. It can be anything. It can be 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, it doesn't really matter. And it can be any frequency band. So the frequency band is dictated by the PA that you attach to it. In this particular case, it's operating on the 1800 industrial spectrum band here in the UK. Now, a question for you. If this is a 2G network, okay, on a Raspberry Pi 3, how long do you think it will take for this to run 4G? And how much longer after that may this be running a 5G SA? Because when you get to that point and this is running 5G SA, you can just carry your voice over an hour, and you have a complete 5G system. Now, the cost of this is lower than a Wi-Fi router. And this one is, yes, it's running a core and everything else, but you don't really need that. You can backhaul it to the operator's core network and save you from the trouble of the HLR, signaling, MSC, and everything else. You just need the base station. Now, the moment that you can run a base station for 4G, which I think is going to be like a year from now, or 5G SA, which personally I think will not be 2 years, then you will have your own 5G base station for the price of a Wi-Fi router. Now, this reminds a lot the 3G femto cell that some of you may remember that operators used to roll out. I remember in the UK alone, I think we roll out nearly 1 million devices, 3G femtos. But it's like that, like turbocharged. Because this can run, if you can run this out of a Raspberry Pi, you can run it out of anything. You can make this a USB that plugs onto your laptop. And you run the software on your laptop, and all you need is the SDR that goes with it. You can run it on the back of your Wi-Fi router, actually. You can run it out of the idle compute of your car. So you can actually carry coverage, service, and a base station for you or for others, wherever you go. I think that is more democratic. And I also think that we usually forget that Open RAN is not only changing the way we deploy macro base stations and bringing supplier diversity and a lower total cost of operation. It's also giving us a lot more control to roll out the network in different ways. And that's something that I think we need to remember. And with that, I give it back to you.
Yago, thank you very much. Very nice reveal as well. Very surprising reveal and very professional reveal there. That's got all our attention, that.
But okay, so later on I'll tell you about security at the airport and
Now, I'm sure one or two of you might have some questions based on what Yago's been saying there, and all the statistics as well, and facts and figures that we just heard. Any thoughts, first of all, from our fellow panelists on what Yago was saying? Oh, we go all stunned into this the new shape of telecoms.
We've been using that sort of hardware for years. It's not new. I think what's different about it is what scale, and if you're reliant upon that for dialing 999 and get an ambulance to arrive within a minute, is it going to perform? And we see variability in that, unfortunately. I think there's much more to do to harden these platforms, but ultimately our Open RAN that we've got running in Leeds, just a few miles north from here, we're definitely seeing the benefits of RIC and how the RIC controller is able to adjust the radio to improve the service depending upon what the environment is. So we've just had a whole load of foliage grow as it goes to spring and summer. And with some of our RIC controllers, we're able to adjust the radios to cope with that. So in terms of the control, I think, it's great to see others seeing that benefit. in terms of deployability of things like that, you know, I'm super unconvinced by what we've seen in our lab as a scalable, deployable solution. And as Yago's rolling out 4G on that, I'll be turning 4G off because I'll be starting the build for 6G. So is it really worth the effort, would be my challenge.
Okay, Neil wins the prize for the first mention of 6G at the DSP Leaders World Forum.
I'm hoping I'm not doing 6G, but all the crazies out there all want to sell it. But
now, Open RAN is one aspect of all this. We've got many more to talk about, so maybe we just park Open RAN for the time being and look at other aspects, because I've got a number of talking points here we would love to cover, starting with the question of whether the planned expansion of the ecosystem that we all want to see, or maybe as operators we want to see, has it stalled? Is there a lack of visibility of new entrants securing telco contracts? Because it doesn't matter how many new entrants there are, if they're not actually getting work from the telcos, what's the point? Or are telcos, perhaps telcos are sticking with their existing partners, and there's a bit of reticism or reluctance. So, Ildiko, let's cut across to you live, because you're sitting patiently there across the Atlantic. So let's come to you and ask you, from your perspective, working with a community of predominantly open source people and developers, do you see the open ecosystem for telecoms as expanding? Is it going as fast as maybe your members and partners hope?
Excellent question, and I would ask, how much time do I have to talk about this? Because I think when we talk about open source, open community, open ecosystem, open minds, it really is a scale, and it is a longer journey. So I have experience in multiple communities, like the OpenStack community. Started to have telecom operators showing up, 6-7 years ago. We had working groups and several activities trying to kind of introduce the concept of not just the open source code itself, but what the open collaboration is all about, how to expand that ecosystem, how we can help the operators and the vendors working together in an open ecosystem. And it kind of became a bit more challenging than what we expected at first, I would say. And then a lot of other activities happened in the ecosystem as well. Like we talked about Open RAN, the concept of how that organization works with the standards and specifications part, and then the open source software development part. It is an interesting concept. Or I could mention OPNFV, Open Platform for NFV, which is now Etiquette. And I think OPNFV itself is an interesting example to this, because I think during the early stages, you could definitely see having a few operators with their vendor ecosystem around and kind of pretty strict ideas in terms of what they would like that project to achieve, how they envisioned it to go. And when it didn't exactly go that way, because open source is somewhat democratic, if it works well, then some of them walked away, and their partners also did walk away, which obviously did not help the project at the very beginning. Now it transformed into Etiquette. We see more operators around. I'm still kind of waiting to see more of the vendor ecosystem being more active in that project as well. So I think we definitely have a lot of challenges, and I think the question really is that what every single organization and even the individuals think when you say open. Do they think about the open interface, an open standard, the open source code, like the code being available under an open source license, or are they at the point of the mindset change, that shift towards openness, being able to discuss common challenges that operators as well as vendors share? are these organizations really ready to talk to anyone who is willing to show up at that table with a solution, feedback, thoughts, brainstorming ideas? Are we ready? I'm not 100% sure that the telecom industry at large is fully ready to this, but I definitely see a lot of evolution and movement. And I think we are taking the steps, maybe a bit slower than a few people or organizations would like to or expect. But I think those who are pioneering in the open ecosystem space, I think they do have responsibility to help others to also join this journey. There are a lot of operators around the globe, all in different stages in terms of where they are with their open source, open networking journey. And I think it really is a common responsibility that we all have, both people like me who are working on the nonprofit side of foundations who are trying to help and shepherd these open source communities and trying to help every organization to work together on a level playing field. And I think that when it comes to the telecom ecosystem, we really need to do a little bit of a better job in terms of being open when it comes to the vendor ecosystem as well. Yes, there are trusted partners, but one of the big advantages of the open source space, for instance, is you can talk to anybody and you can learn a lot. There's a lot of knowledge, experience that people can share, and you can build trust in that open ecosystem, and you can use that trust to expand your trusted network of vendors and partners. And I really hope that we will see more of that happening.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
Hopefully people on the stage are, I don't know, either agreeing with me or they will say that I was completely wrong. So
Thanks, Ildiko. Thanks, Ildiko. You raised some really valid points, and we've been talking about it for some time now. And sometimes it seems that we're still trying to solve this one. Yago, from your perspective, with your lab, say, and also with your tip hat on, are we seeing an increase in interest from other vendors coming to the telecoms space?
Indeed, we are. Yes, and I think it's a positive thing. So I think when you look at the network, depending on the domain, there are domains which are mature enough, and we have plenty of actors, and we have healthy competition going on and innovation. There are others where consolidation has happened, also geopolitical tension, and the number of vendors has been decreasing over time. The radio is one example, but it's not the only one. On those is where I think opening the ecosystem attracts optionality and make increase the diversity. And on those cases, I think the general question has been okay, but for maybe small or medium companies that haven't played there, how are they going to make the transition and compete with incumbents, which are, they have big market share and big size? I think the answer to that question in general terms has been that players that were big on adjacent industries have been able to leverage their scale on that kind of adjacent game to actually come and play into this industry, which has been, I think, great news. And I think is probably one of the biggest factors why Open RAN is happening at the speed at which it is happening is because we were able to adapt and leverage the scale of adjacent players for them to come and throw their weight into this.
So it's perhaps easier for those companies that have been successful in an adjacent industry rather than a pure startup?
I think for the time being it is. But I think the way we're making it, I think Neil mentioned it, with things like RIC, which is probably the next frontier of Open RAN. Once that we have a good platform that is mature, stable, that people can rely, that is being rolled out globally. I think the next thing that's going to happen, even after system integration is sorted, is RIC. And that will be a very interesting entry point for companies of all sizes, even small ones that are particularly good at doing one thing. And that is different to what we're trying to do now, which is take off.
We have high hopes for Rick. Danielle, please.
Well, not speaking from the network side, but speaking as a software vendor with a startup, right? I have a brand new startup. It's about 2 years old. I launched it at MWC 21. Breaking into the telcos, especially the big guys, is pretty much impossible. I mean, we on purpose aren't attacking the tier ones. Because the first question I get is, well, where are you installed? And what do you have? And does it work? Right? And then you get the RFPs, and the RFPs are all based on, 30 years of telco history. And you're like, do you support 3G and 2G? Right? And it goes backwards. And all the RFP responses are built on the way the software is installed today. I have a serverless, 100% SaaS, multi-tenant charger that runs in AWS, right? When I look at the RFP questions, I can't answer them. There's a whole section on, write down the dimensioning requirements of your product. None? So literally my goal with my startup is to destroy RFPs. We just write tons of vision so that we just completely blow them up. Because we're trying to change minds. And so that's what I have to do, because my team's like, you have to be shortlisted. You have to have high compliance in your RFPs. And I'm like, we're going to fail because it's just a bunch of shit. And so we just blow them up. We write what we're trying to do. And we actually have managed to blow up a couple of RFPs. People come back to us and they're like, oh, we don't even understand what you are. And so that's where we're going. All of these new vendors in the ecosystem, right? Instead of playing the game and answering the RFP the way you're supposed to answer it, you're like, we're innovative. We're trying new technology, new ideas. I can't go to the tier ones because I am graded like an Amdocs, like a Nutcracker, right? I'm never going to win, so I'm just gonna blow them up.
Can we take this mic away as well?
My Lady Gaga man.
So, when you first asked the question about has the ecosystem stalled, I'm like, here's an uplifting question to the start of the panel, right? So going back to what Yago was saying, I think what Open RAN is doing and sort of disaggregation is doing in general is allowing you to step back and say, what should be my ecosystem? Where do I want to play, right? And here we are at the DSP Leader Summit, and I think I was reminiscing about 15 years ago where we had the DSP Summit at some point, right? And so at that time, it was 3G that was being rolled out. And if you even Google DSP today, what comes up first is download and streaming of music. That's what DSP definition stands for today if you Google it, right? So we're sort of, I think, outdated about talking about DSP. I think the world has moved on, right? I think we should be calling this the ODSP, the on-demand service provider, right?
Oh, don't say that.
Agile
service branding cost. Does it cost us a fortune?
Just put a little O in next behind it. But the point is, we're moving into this on-demand world, right? We've been talking about network as a service for a while. We have almost all of the tools that we would want to make it happen, right? You've got 5G, you've got artificial intelligence, heck, we have blockchain, right? So there's a lot of toys that we can play around with to make this happen. And so it goes back to the question of ecosystem and what that should look like. So it's not just about building the network, right? It's about monetizing. Everything is getting connected today, right? So you target the industry verticals. What does that do to your ecosystem? And so at NEC, those are the kinds of things that we are thinking about, is what are the key building blocks that would allow carriers, Neil and Yago, to look at not only building open networks, but also monetizing those networks, right? So it's about open interfaces, the flexibility of mixing and matching different components. It's about automation, right? It's about intelligence to predict what's going to happen. It's about systems integration capability to target verticals and create new use cases and new revenue models. That's the kind of stuff that we should be talking about, right? And that defines the ecosystem.
Right, thanks, Rahul. We will talk about this. We are talking about this. We will continue to talk about this. I want to just flick the question over a little bit and come to Adrian in a second. When we're talking about the ecosystem, expanding the ecosystem, what about from your perspective about new companies and non-traditional telco companies getting involved in ETSI processes?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the standardisation process per se, and I think it was illustrative this morning, when you started this event this morning, in the first 10 minutes, the word standards was mentioned 25 times because we were counting and we were ticking this off. And I think it's something to bear in mind that as we go from where we are now to where we're likely to be in the world that Neil fears, the 6G world, we are probably, I think, going to be more dependent on standards, not less dependent on standards. As you define more interfaces and you have more software components within those standards, you're going to be more dependent on those standards than you are today. So we need to get standards right. Coming back to the specific question you ask, if you look at the population within standards bodies, even during times of depression, if you look at the pandemic, for example, certainly ETSI, my home body, we had predicted a downturn. We thought there would be a lull in the economy. We thought we would lose membership and the population in our committees would decline. And what we witnessed was the complete opposite. We've had an explosion of new companies joining, greater participation within standards bodies. Now, you can argue that some of that was facilitated because of all of our meetings were online rather than involving international travel, and maybe that helped to accelerate this. But yes, there is a greater participation from a wider portfolio of companies, emerging companies in this space, and many of them are SMEs. We're not just big companies. There is something like 760 companies in 3GPP. Half of those are SMEs, so it's illustrative that the ecosystem is changing. But I think we're going to come on to standards later, but maybe I'll save some of my points for that. But I think we really need to reflect on the way that standards are being written if we're going to become more dependent on them. And how do we make sure that these emerging companies who are new to the ecosystem, that they feel welcome and that they can contribute and that they're taken seriously within the standards writing community?
Thanks, Adrian. At this point, do you want to go to the audience and see if anyone's got any points or questions they want to raise at this point about the ecosystem and whether or not it's expanding at the right rate of knots, or if there's any fear of it stalling or any concerns? Did I see a hand there in the middle? Is that Francis? Sorry, the lights are shining very brightly.
I'll make it very brief. Are you seeing any opportunities in openness in aggregation to change the way you're operationally running your networks or your approach to the market?
Any with Neil?
I don't know if I understood the question. In aggregation?
How are you taking the opportunities for openness and disaggregation to change the way you run and operate your networks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of disaggregation. feels like I buy half of what I need and I have to pay someone to put it together. I don't know, it doesn't... And I see some of the big hyperscalers moving away from disaggregation and data centers because what they were trying to do was get the price down. They've done it. They now understand it, and they're now rolling out the same sort of switches we use. For me, I have been writing open source since I was 16 years old. If you've got a Mac, you've probably got network drivers that I helped write and test. And the open source has been a phenomenal movement. And actually, you talk to kind of pick up what I think really drives where we're headed. The standard's the code, right? If you write the code and it works and people want to use it and you get consensus around that code, you are the standard. It's not whether ETSI stick their name on it or some other organization stick your name on it. You stuck your name on it as Fred Blogs. I've written this device driver. I've published in open source. It's now the standard. And that is the beauty of openness. But we talk about open in our industry like it's kind of like a marketing blip, when actually it's kind of a way of thinking entirely differently. So I hear about Open RAN, and look, I love what Open RAN's trying to do, but most of Open RAN is not open. We still have proprietary vendors who I can't get access to their code. I don't know where it was written. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know what quality it's got. How is that open? And that, for me, when I look at disaggregation, I just make that puzzle even more complex. Is it solvable? Of course it's solvable. But actually I can solve it in a simpler way just by not disaggregating and reaggregating. And my customers love it. They buy what we're selling like hotcakes, and I can focus my time on going into customers and building solutions for them, trying to fix something that, in my mind, isn't that broken.
Thanks, Neil.
That reminds me when...
Well, Yago, let's go to you first.
When the core network functions were appliances, and you were buying the entire box, fully aggregated, hardware, software, and everything, and it was a black box, and you were paying probably 10 times what you're paying today. That's what you were missing. So the problem with just tagging things like disaggregation or openness is that I think it gives way to a kind of a strong challengers' opinions or debates on things that are obvious. And this disaggregation of software and hardware, that is in reality the commoditization of hardware that is off the shelf, and therefore it is coming from higher volumes and is cheaper for everybody. This has been happening since the 60s. So it's not something that I think if you stop and think, it should be much different from the way you're running your core or from what we've been doing forever. There is also, I think, some misunderstanding from open source and open RAN, or so the fact that you open the interfaces through some standards that, by the way, we've been going after since I can remember. I mean, I joined this industry when I was 25, and we were already trying to open those interfaces in 2G and 3G, so it looks like we finally made it. But that doesn't mean that the code needs to be or has to be open sourced. It can still be, you can buy that software and the support from someone, which is one thing, or maybe you can open source it. Like this is running open source code. Now at that scale, I would deploy that in my network, but I'm not sure I would run an open source software for the macro network. Probably not, right? So these are two different things. But the fact that you are opening the interfaces and disaggregating, you can always attack from that perspective, but it's exactly what we did at the core network, no more, no less.
Thanks, Yago. I want to come over to Klaus now, because Klaus, for as long as I've known you, you've been advocating openness and a more open ecosystem. What's your feeling today? What are you seeing today? Has progress stalled, or are you fairly happy with the way things are going?
To be open, I think the openness is not very well defined, and what means ecosystem, new ecosystem, because everybody have an interpretation from their point of view, and to make an optimistic interpretation what eco means. And so, to be honest, Yago, I'm more with Neil about the disaggregation stuff and the openness stuff. I think we are increasing definitely complexity. The idea of openness is a good one. If you like to achieve, to bring more partners on board, smaller companies on board, to give them the opportunity to deliver software pieces for our technology, in theory is fine. But if you go looking about the reality, and by the end of the day, we have this aggregation, we have to aggregate everything, to integrate everything. And by the end of the day, the bigger vendor will do that. And then we're coming back to the old strategy which we already had, that we have big vendors which are integrating stuff. And then this coming back what Neil said, then buy a complete system from a vendor, much easier. And concerning the ecosystem, as I said, we are discussing with friends. I'm discussing with a colleague what does ecosystem means. I think he's on my line. That is fine, fantastic. But I think we are discussing that not from an overarching point of view, because if we're discussing ecosystem, then we have to also discuss about the regulator, because they can't ignore them. By the end of the day, they will kill every open platform, because from security point of view, they're definitely not happy. If you see what's going on here in the European market and compare it with the Russian activity, I can't imagine that the German government will say, okay, we'll go forward, make everything is open, and the Russian can kill our technology. I think this is not, but what I'm missing really is an overarching discussion about a complex situation. We are only focusing on the technology and ignoring the rest. And that is a mistake what we're definitely doing here. That is my point.
Thank you, Klaus. Great.
Actually, I wanted to challenge you, little guy. Can you put your poll back up? Can I derail you for a minute?
Well,
on the poll,
let's continue talking as the guys behind the scenes have a nervous breakdown.
There's what they should be expecting me being here. There's one thing missing from your poll, which is are you getting from what difference with your customers and your business is this making? And it's not on your poll. So I was a bit shocked by that because holy shit, we're here for customers, and if a poll like that doesn't reflect customers. Sorry, I don't know who wrote the poll. I apologise for giving you a hard time, but I kind of I was at another event last couple of weeks ago where for like 20 minutes, for not 20 minutes, for 2 hours, I heard the word customer twice, and it infuriated me. And this where we're doing this for our customers, so. I want to, if I want to be able to, have my engineers stand up on a stage like this and say, hey, we've written our own open source here, we've published it because we think it's in the interest of the industry, but we've made a few tweaks and we're ahead of it ourselves, and that's giving customers a better experience, it's giving them a better service, it's giving them better reliability, it's making it more secure, and we wrote it here in Britain. And that I feel is becoming ever increasingly important around where are some of these things coming from, how are we putting them together, how do we really know that we're putting them together. This year we have the Telecoms Security Act that affects every carrier in the UK where we've got a whole bunch of technical requirements. It's probably going to make a lot of this stuff a lot harder. So we better get our house in order, and we better ensure that we've got the right leadership and the right people across our organizations that can actually cope with things like open source in a much different way than we've had to, and other open things. And I'll finish on one point. We've had this debate about working from home, and so it's really hard to work from home and do this this sort of collaboration. I think, well, crikey, where were you when we wrote Linux? Because no one was in the same office. We were all working, in kind of early 90s, no one met each other. We maybe went to Usenix every once a year, but we were kind of focused on a purpose and an outcome for people who wanted to use this software and wanted to use it for kind of the good and to create what we now know as the internet.
Well, Neil, we seem to have lost the poll, but however, we'll make you a promise. We will make that a panel in our upcoming Open Telco Infra Summit online later this year. We'll have a focus on that. And I think there was a question at about 10 minutes ago, somewhere towards the back of the hall. If there's still a question at the back of the hall, just stick your hand up and we'll get a microphone there. If the question has now gone and passed and it's expired, then don't you worry. One at the front now. We've got one at the front. Who's got the mic box? Here comes Alex from the back of the room. Oh, no, it's right behind you.
Throw it.
Oh, no, it isn't.
So my name is Sudhanshu, and I'm part of Telco DR, DR's organization. While listening to all of you, the question which came into my mind is the lack of adoption of open ecosystem. Is it a technology problem, or it's an accountability or shift of accountability problem? That if you're using open source, the shift of accountability shifts towards the operator, then the network vendor itself, or so the suppliers. So my question is, do you think if it's an accountability problem, that you own the accountability now to run the network because you own the source code, what needs to happen to take that accountability more comfortably?
So is it an accountability problem that's maybe preventing more open source in the network?
I think my question is, Kubernetes is a great example. It was an open source code, but how many operators are comfortable running their own Kubernetes? They are still going out for vendors to manage Kubernetes. So that tells me that it's an accountability issue rather than technology issue.
It's an expectation issue.
Sorry?
It's an expectation issue.
Yeah.
So if you set the right, if you set the right expectations, then why does it matter? And I mean, we get, the the biggest worry around open sources is, well, there's no one easy to blame when it goes pear-shaped, right? But if you set that expectation, hey, look, we're going to have problems. We need to write code on the fly.
Yeah.
Here's the team that are going to do that. Here's the wider community that might help us. Here's how we're going to test it to avoid that. Then you've got no problem. I look at the biggest control plane platform in the world is DNS.
Yeah.
And for the vast majority of it, more than 90% of it is open source, and it runs the whole internet. And we never think about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree with you. I think there is maybe a factor into accountability. So when we say, for instance, so we all agree that disaggregation attracts complexity, and that system integration is a problem to solve. When we say that it's an accountability problem, we're fooling ourselves. Why? Because up until now, we were buying a kit from an incumbent, say on the radio, right? So Ericsson or Nokia or Huawei, I mean, it doesn't matter. So it comes integrated. Now, was it born integrated? No. Is it fundamentally more complex than what we're trying to do? No. The difference is they integrated it for us. So they made that complexity disappear. They abstracted that complexity. But however, we're paying for that complexity, right? And we don't know how much we are paying for that complexity. We only know that we are paying for it. Now, when you get all the pieces and you have to do it yourself, you have more visibility. You have more control. You can scrutinize, and you have more ways to actually check that the security is in place than when you get a black box. Yeah. But again, it's an accountability problem that you may or you may not want to have. Now, if you accept that and you change the way you operate the network, then actually you have much more control over your costs, over security, and over everything else. But you have to accept the accountability. So I'm with you.
Thanks, Yago. Well, we've got another comment from Ildiko. So, Ildiko, let's come in some additional comments from you.
Thank you. Just waiting for the seaplane to leave my boat's area so I can talk. So I wanted to reflect on a few things that everybody on the panel was saying, and that were brought up in some of the questions from the audience as well. I can hear a lot of, keywords, buzzwords, however you want to call it, containers, Kubernetes, microservices, disaggregation, openness, and then comes accountability, integration, and all those challenges. What it boils down to me, in my personal opinion, one of the big problems is a fear of change, and change in processes, business models. I think that one is a key. Business models have to change. If you change the way of how you're developing software solutions, how you're integrating them, who are your ecosystem and industry players, the business models cannot stay the same, because that will ruin everything else. I think a good example to this is the integration and accountability part. Like, open source software does not mean that the operators from now on, everybody has to go pick up the open source software and integrate it and operate it all by themselves. Vendors are still there. I don't think that it is a goal to have the vendor ecosystem to just completely, disappear into this open source, pot. The point really is to lower the maintenance cost of creating infrastructure, hardware, and software as a starting point. That is a great place to collaborate. So vendors should have an easier life in terms of picking up the open source software and then add their added value to it, not in the middle of it without contributing it back, because that again ruins the whole purpose of open source. But really the point is to work together on all the things that everybody needs and gives you a hard time, and you will not make a lot of money on it. And put the vendor lock in someplace else if it's still something that you want to do. But trying to saying that you're using open source software and then you are doing and participating in open source and then do modifications in that software and still creating the vendor lock-in, and that's where your business is coming from, that's just completely broken. Absolutely broken.
Yeah,
and I think that another challenge that we have right now is, again, the fear of change and really understanding what open source means, what open collaboration means, and what the technology terms mean. Like, just because you're shoving everything into containers, it will not magically make your system work that much better. Maybe it will perform much worse because you didn't adjust the application to run in a container on top of a cloud. That has been a problem for years now.
It has, Ildiko. It has indeed. You're absolutely right there, Ildiko. Thanks very much for that. We've got to move on though, because we've got a couple of more talking points we've got to get through here. I'd just like to move on to something that we've been talking about for a long, long time, and that is how the need for telcos to support startups and to foster innovation. We hear it so often. We need to support innovation. Telcos need to do this. They need to be capable of nurturing and developing viable new companies. And are they doing it? Are telcos doing enough to help here? Now, we spoke last week with Mark at Singtel, the CTO of Singtel, and we're going to hear in a second of what Mark had to say. So can we play what Mark had to say, please?
For us, we have been funding with a corporate VC of a few $100 million for more than 10 years now. And we have worked with the likes of France Telecom and Deutsche Telekom with their VC as well for many years in incubating startups, in supporting new startups. Not all of them, of course, make it to mainstream, but many have also prospered. And essentially, I think for us, in our case, the corporate VC called Innovate has generated a return above our WACC.
Mark Chung there at Singtel, he's happy that his own VC organization is supporting startups and encouraging them. Obviously, not all of them are going to make it through, but a percentage will. But do we feel the same way? Do we think that there is sufficient support from telcos and those divisions within telcos whose job it is to nurture and encourage and invest in new companies? Are they doing enough to help?
So if you go to a VC and say my business model is just telco focused, guess what the answer is going to be?
Goodbye.
Right?
No money.
Because we all know it takes 18 to 24 months, right, to get through a sales cycle, so to speak, right? Now, having said that, again, telcos, they're not in the business of just supporting innovation and startups and all of that. So I think as networks become more open, it creates a foundation for innovation, because then you're not locked into, duopolies, oligopolies, or a very small set of vendors, right? So I think we're certainly seeing that with Open RAN, with, XApps and RIC solutions coming out in the market. So there's the technology aspect of it. I think from a business perspective, we're in the communications business, but we as an ecosystem internally don't do a good job of communicating with ourselves, right? So to give you a hypothetical example, if we were able to, from a vendor perspective, get an understanding of, look, here's my network infrastructure requirements for the next 2 years, right? That takes out inefficiencies in the end-to-end supply chain, because it's a scale game, right? Infrastructure, primarily I'm talking about radio units, base stations, et cetera, hardware stuff, that's a scale game. So the more you can aggregate capacity, the more you can do a better job of forecasting demand, it has ripple effects through the entire supply chain. And it allows us to take cost out of the entire supply chain, right? So yes, technology helps, but I think there's things that can be done from a business perspective. We talk about spectrum auctions for 5G. It'll be great if regulators actually talk to each other in different countries, right? Because we've got if we could do band harmonization, that again prevents fracturing of the supply chain, right? You can create radio units that are coherent across different regions. So again, you're aggregating demand. You're taking cost out of the supply chain. So there's things that, could be done in a hypothetical world, but just a couple of ideas.
Good ideas. Rahul, thanks so much for those. Tenorio?
Well, let's talk about why VC doesn't invest in telco, right? And so the way VC works is they give you $5-10 million to prove out. You present your idea. They give you a small amount of money relative to what you need to invest in telco, right? So $5 or $10 million. And they want to see a flagship logo, which means probably a tier one. So you go sell it to tier one. And I wrote an article about this, I think, in Light Reading, right? You go sell it to a tier one, go visit Yago, convince him, right? And for Yago to invest a couple $1 million is not a lot of money for Yago to spend from a telco perspective. And so now I am, on the relative scale of what else you're spending on.
You make your point.
Okay. And then you throw $1 million my way. From a VC's perspective, they're like, oh my God, product market fit, traction on our little investment. But from Yago's perspective, he just got a captive, VC-backed hot silicon startup. And that startup is now caught in the middle because I can't lose Vodafone. And now Vodafone can ask me to do whatever they want. And that's really the pivotal point for that startup, because now I have a roadmap, I have a plan for my product, I'm so excited. I have all these visions, but here comes my big customer that's telling me to customize it for their needs, build 6G. That maybe the market doesn't need 6G, but Neil over here is saying, I'm going to be first with 6G. That's my big thing. And
but I gave you my 2 million. So why are you listening to
or whatever, right?
Children,
this guy
children.
needs this.
It's just typical.
You want that?
I never asked you.
I have one big customer. I have $1 million, and so that is why VC does not invest in telco tech, because it's more of a consulting business than a product business. And when the product businesses get the big SaaS multiple valuations, right? It's the product revenue. So for me, with Totogi, I am like, we're starting small, we're going down the market because the tier 3s and the tier 2s won't do what a tier 1 will do to me. And I can build out my roadmap and I can stay product focused. For my investors, they are expecting big multiples. They don't want me to be a consulting business. They understand telco, and that is the problem with VC, is that you got to stay on that product roadmap. And that's why they don't invest in telco, because they all turn into software consulting businesses.
Thanks for those insights, Daniel. Terrific.
I think so. Okay, so Yago doesn't have 2 million to invest because the his ARPU is not the same as the operators in the US. Mm-hmm. However, he has to spend money in a spectrum, not like operators maybe in some parts of Asia that paid nothing for spectrum. Yeah. For if we could actually have thrown all the money that we spend in spectrum in rolling out 5G, we would have more coverage than China does today and money to invest in VCs. But our own return of investment would probably be better than what it looks today. So what you described could have been the case maybe 5 or 10 years ago, but now the picture, I think, is even worse. Now, there is another way on which operators can help, I think, startups. If it's not investing on them, is actually generating revenue for them. So to your previous point, and I have to apologize on behalf of Tier 1, we're sorry to make the RFPs so undigestible. I think you're right. I think you have a point. So we need to work on that. And I think big operators are very difficult to navigate for startups, but I think a lot of effort should be focusing on actually making startups successful by giving them opportunities to make revenue. Now, open ecosystem can do a lot for that.
Yeah.
Great. And also, good advice, if in doubt, blame the governments. That's always a good strategy. Klaus, you want to come in on this one? And then we'll,
I have a comment about that one, about bringing startups up to the business. I think the current procurement processes by operators are killing a lot of good ideas. Because normally, if a startup coming into an operator and I have a great idea for an application, for a service, something like that, at first what he has to do is to deliver a POC on his own money. He has to invest it. And most of the startups are not able to do that. And then this idea will disappear because they are not can present that. That's one point. Another point is if you consider that procurement guys have a complete different business model. They are paid by cost savings. And it could be happen that a good idea from a startup costs more in the short run is in the long run. And this will definitely also kill the idea. And that is what I see also as a big obstacle to bring startups in an environment like a telco industry. Because, as I said, the old procurement process, so far I'm aware of, they are killing a lot of ideas because they are too expensive, it's not cost savings, you have to present what is the business case for that, is there any revenue change, and that's coming into calculation. Because, most of the business cases, which I know, is based on assumption, and they can screw here and screw there, and one way it kills or it survives. And that is one point which I like to say. Yes, we have to bring startups up to our business. Yes, we have to give them the opportunity to present their ideas. But then immediately we have to think about how we can bring them on board. I think that is a key issue for me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Klaus. Good points. Neil?
Yeah, I think VCs don't invest in people selling to telcos because they look at telcos and say, why would I stick my money into an industry that isn't growing? I mean, it's that simple. And having stood in front of a couple of them, that's kind of the message they gave me. So we've got to get our own house in order before we'll generate that sort of investment. However, I look around the UK right now, there's about 30 or 40 new startups all building fibre. And they're my competitors and they're keeping us on our toes, and it's great to see it. Because not everyone's going to build everywhere, but there are cases to get over the line if you put the effort in. We're working with a company called Tirana, wireless startup for fixed wireless access, and I got half the people in the business saying, well, why aren't we using the 5G network for that? I was like, well, we want to make money and grow. So I think you have to kind of get back to what's really important. Again, I'll mention the word customers and solving customers' problems, because if you solve a customer's problem, they'll give you money forever. I mean, it's incredible how the difference that makes. And the more customer problems we solve, and that's why I'm in 5G, I'm really focused on use cases and really turning them into solutions for customers. Because they'll we'll help them solve a really tough business problem by bringing the network to them, by working with them on a problem that solves their big issue, perhaps leveraging some startups in that solution, or more than one, and then actually making a difference for that customer. And then with a startup in that situation, it's really easy to manage the risk. It's really easy to show them the value. It's really easy for them to make a case because they're not selling to telcos, they're selling with telcos.
Speaking as a customer, I'm absolutely delighted that one of those UK startup fibre companies rolled out its network in my little tiny town. So, as a customer, that's a good feedback from me. Now, are there any? Oh, there are. Question at the front here, Alex. Marissa?
Hi, I'm Marisa Viveros from IBM. So I'm a little bit confused with some of the statements because almost every large telco, tier one, they all have a VC branch in part of their business. You look at Telstra, they have a portfolio. You look at Vodafone, they also have a portfolio. Deutsche Telekom has a portfolio of companies that they're investing. What I found more interesting within the last couple of months is T-Mobile. They announced a program where they're investing $1 billion, and they call it Unleash 5G Innovation. They include with that labs where developers can come and work. They are making engineers accessible to help those companies. They are also working, they have actually established a workplace where these companies can come and work. So they don't need an office. They can actually come to these locations and get help from T-Mobile. I thought that was very interesting. They're also announcing work with Qualcomm, with Disney. So to me, ecosystem is much more than just a startup. ecosystem includes not all of these other areas that I think T-Mobile has announced a wonderful program in addressing the problem of how do they get more innovation within the networks. So just in case you guys did not know, I think that's worth looking into.
Good point. Thank you. Any comments from our audience about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, co-creation is very important, right? Because I think, again, it's about different use cases, different revenue opportunities, different verticals that telcos could target. So I think the more we can do that in the industry, the more innovation it's going to promote and foster.
Great. Thanks, Rahul. Okay. Sure. Should we go to another question from the audience? There's one at the front here. Yeah, Amit?
So yes, thanks for that. I just want to make a comment because I think also operators are undermined in the effort they do towards ORAN and towards open source and towards also all these activities. You see in Europe how many operators have been committed to ORAN and how much from big operators. I mean, you have seen what Yago was saying, also Deutsche Telekom, Orange, Telefonica, and others. So Vodafone as well. So actually they're all behind ORAN, pushing for it and allowing for companies to come and innovate, and they're waiting patiently to get things done. So that's on one hand, and well said, the comments here, so that actually the venture capitals and all the support that's coming for startups. But I want to say something in honesty. I mean, it's not startups per se, it's the ideas behind the startups. When a startup comes with a brilliant idea, we stand behind it, and we can even invest into them and support them. But it has to be really a brilliant idea, because there are more startups that we can even think of ideas. There's so many. So we need to be very selective, and it's fair to us and to our business. But we are behind that. We're not against the startups by any means.
It's got to be the right idea. It's got to be the right concept for you.
Indeed.
Thanks very much for that. Any comments from our guests on anything we've heard so far? Neil?
I mean, I don't think we're going to invest in bad ideas.
Well,
I've seen a few.
Maybe not you, Neil.
Who knows? But I think I do think. I mean, Don Clark. I don't know if any of you know him. He's an ex-BT guy. He's been around. He's working on a kind of a memorandum of understanding about how we as telcos can spend more time and give more time to startups, and we're trying to figure out how we support that. If you haven't seen it, he's posted it to LinkedIn. I do think startups have got a massive part to play in telco, and we do need to nurture them and help them. Quite often that isn't about investment. Quite often as Daniela said, it's about giving them an opportunity, but trying to be fair with that. And I'm always very conscious of that. In BT, our processes could bankrupt many companies over the period of two or 3 years, and we can be great at wasting people's time. I try and, as execs, try and cut through that and say, hey, here's a guy I work with. Let's just prove the point on this and bank some benefit. But we've just invested in a startup called Safe on security that measures your own personal risk, and it's a tiny investment, but as a tool for selling other security products, it's huge. But I think stick to what's close to your own base so that you can actually add value to the startup that you're trying to work with, more than just selling to you. Another great startup, Quilt, phenomenal startup who's doing CDN. They were finding it really difficult to get traction. We deployed it just before COVID kicked off. We run pretty much half of our video traffic's now delivered via Quilt, and we make money from it. But no one was listening to that make money part or the other part, which is this will improve the service for your customers. We're too focused on how much pain will this cause me to introduce this, or will it break and who'll get the blame for it with startups. And I think we've got to be more braver than that, is my view.
Well, one thing that we try to do is really start with a small experiment, right? Not asking to take over the crown jewels.
Agreed.
And a lot of times, like when you go into a telco, they're like, I'm not going to install this in Germany, right? Because that's my high ARPU country and whatever. But I'm like, you don't need to start with that. Start with something meaningful. Develop the business case. How is this going to change the economics, either a cost or revenue? And like I force my team, I'm like, let's write down the business case that we think we're going to approve, and then let's prove it and show to the telco, we are helping you. We're helping you with your customers. We're helping you to get more ARPU or reduce churn or whatever it might be. But give that startup a chance and stop making the bar so high to get in, right? Just try it. And so like our charger, we can install it in like a week. And it's so different than what we're used to. And a lot of startups, especially with cloud technology, I am the cloud girl after all, with cloud technology, you can start to experiment so much more quickly. Give it a shot. Give it a try. Just install it. It doesn't work? Uninstall it. And give the startup feedback so they can go back and iterate and get it right the next time.
There's one more area I want to get onto. Before I do that, we have had an audience question in about Open RAN. Yago, I may put this one across to you, please. And here's the question. The question says, where does the recent EU cybersecurity report on ORAN leave the roadmap? Because the report shows that there are a number of opportunities with Open RAN, but also significant security challenges that must remain addressed.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Where's the ORAN roadmap now, given that the EU cybersecurity report said there's still quite a few areas there that we need to focus in on?
Right, okay. So yes, there are still a few areas that we need to focus on, of course. And we are doing that. So I think there is a good security framework, and we started on the right foot on this. And I think we had a great opportunity to start from the design phase to making sure that this is secure by design, and that's what we're doing. The security of the RAN system, wasn't a topic a few years ago, and I think it's fair to say it hasn't been applied to all the vendors equally. I think so. Yes, there are areas that will develop. I think the roadmap is there and is public, and I think there are, I wouldn't say concerns, but there are questions on security. As I said before, I think we need to leverage the tools and the possibilities and opportunities for scrutiny that Open RAN is giving, that contrast with a closed kind of black box that the incumbent architecture typically is. So that makes, I've heard the comparison, which I like a lot, several times, like examining Open RAN for security is like looking for something in a room with the lights on, while the incumbent architecture is typically a dark room where you can't see anything. You just have to trust that someone took care of it. So I think it's a fantastic basis for making sure that the system is secure by design and that the right initiatives are in place. So.
Thank you. And that does lead us very, very nicely to what is probably going to be our final talking point of the session, because we do have a lot of standards activity in the industry. There's a lot of labs out there. There's more labs being announced every day, it seems. There's a lot of plug tests and plug fests going on. So openness and interoperability shouldn't theoretically be a problem. Yet we hear that it still can be, and there's many closed interfaces and systems. There's proprietary technology. It's looking in that room with the lights off. You can't get in there. There's barriers towards a more open plug and play ecosystem. So the question is, how do we fix this? And we asked Mark Chung of Singtel this question last week. So let's hear what Mark has to say first.
I think the world is progressively becoming more open. For those in the industry would recall that previously we had all sorts of telco standards, CDMA and UMTS, but I think the world has also learned its lesson, investing in different standards. So we have now converged to 3GPP standards, and that saved, the innovative ecosystem a lot of time and effort. Now, of course, there remains in the industry certain proprietary and closed interfaces. The appeal is, with 5G coming along, with the disaggregation of networks, it is absolutely crucial that the ecosystem players adopt open standards to facilitate growth and innovation.
So, Adrian, let me come to you first on this one. You have a lot of experience here with standards, obviously. You've seen the development. How can we do more? Is there anything more we can do to facilitate a better way of operating?
It's interesting because it relates very much to the question that you just put to Yago, because the report published by the EC last week into ORAN, and if you haven't read it, I would recommend you do go and read it. It's available on the Commission website. But there's a whole section in there on standardisation, and I don't want to talk about any particular body, but what it says is when you're writing standards for this particular engineering scenario, you should write them in a transparent and open way, which means that effectively anybody can get hold of the material, they can follow what you're doing. You're effectively crowdsourcing the validation of your work. And if, by contrast, you choose a venue which is inherently closed, then there's a likelihood that you'll pay a price for that. At some point, it will slow down your time to market. You will raise suspicion. People will want to know what's going on. They can't see your work. And what this report from the EC really says is that, be careful. Make sure that especially for something like security, the best way to develop security standards is in a fully open and transparent way. Security by obscurity was done years ago. We finished doing that. So do make sure that you are open, transparent, and everybody who wants to take part in this work, who's a legitimate player, has the right to do so, because you exclude people and you will pay a price from that exclusion. Coming on to interoperability, of course, we have many, many years of experience of doing interoperability, but interoperability can only be achieved if you have very rigorous definitions of the interfaces. So if the base standards themselves are poor, you will never achieve a high level of interoperability. So you have to first focus on making sure that your interface standards are robust. Then we have many years of experience of knowing how to do the interoperability testing of those interfaces. But again, be careful. This is not a one-time do the testing, tick the box, and it's done. This is a continuous, never-ending process of interoperability. Every time you do a slight change, you have to go through the interoperability testing again. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money. On the good side, we know how to do this. It's a matter of getting the community engaged, running as many hackathons, plugfests, plug tests as we can, and make sure that you invite the whole world to come and take part.
Thanks, Adrian. Any Rahul first?
Yes, so I think security is a multi-level problem, right? As we talk to customers and actually even government customers, there's also trusted networks, right? So one of the things that we're working on is, closely with the likes of NTT is sort of network transparency and assurance, right? So there's interfaces and interoperability, but then there's a bigger construct of security as well. So, it's you have to take sort of a holistic approach to security.
I think a lot of times with interoperability, people think of it as like APIs and being able to connect two different applications together. And I think at Totogi, what we're doing is we're actually sort of thinking of it in a different way, which is not so much building applications that humans are interacting with, but rather building services that you can call from anywhere. Interfaces we haven't even thought of. And so charging as a service, right? Like, do you have to go exactly through the charger? If you need a churn value, churn propensity, right? Being able to combine that with machine learning from AWS or from Google, and then calling that from like a pair of AR glasses in a retail store. So as a customer comes in, you know that this person is already grumpy because they've recently had a bad network experience. And so when I think about openness, right, and I think about what we're trying to accomplish at Totogi, we're like just opening up the entire application and saying, telcos, you build the applications you guys want to build. We're going to use open standards defined by starting with TM Forum, right? And saying, you can call it from anywhere. It doesn't need to be my interface. You don't have to go through my people to get to it. Your teams can build it or your SI can build it. And I think we're going to start to see whole new levels of creativity around what you can do with connectivity when it's open. And I hesitate to call them microservices, because they're not really microservices, but it is a service that you can call from anywhere. And that's a whole new level of openness I don't think this industry has seen. But we've seen it in other industries, right? Like Twilio's doing that with SMS capability, right? You can call it as a service from anywhere. Stripe does that with payment. You can like call their payment services from any website, from any application, and you don't need to use their developers. You just pay by the API use. It's a whole new crazy level of thinking, but the stairs in the room, maybe I blew your mind in terms of what we're thinking and what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're just trying to like open up Pandora's box, give it to telcos and say, where do you need the service to be? It could be in a website, it could be in a customer center, it could be in glasses, it could be a watch, it could be AR, it could be VR, whatever you need it to be. Call it, combine it with cloud services, and go build the things you need to do to go drive more revenue and make your customers really happy.
Thanks, Daniel. Yago?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the interface between the DU and the RU, down there, 15 layers lower than the API is not an API application kind of interface. The standard bodies are doing a phenomenal job, and if it wasn't for that, the network would be a total chaos. But it actually works very well. However, there is a misconception of problem with expectations. So interoperable and standard doesn't mean plug and play at all. And as Adrian was saying, is a continuous effort. So system integration is a continuous effort that you have to put in place to make sure that the two boxes speak to each other. Now, that's nothing new, but even a new chipset that is just perfectly 3GPP compliant needs a lot of testing even before it gets into the first smartphone to make sure that it speaks to each and every one of the single infrastructure on the radio. So they're not plug and play either. Now, if it wasn't for the standard, we wouldn't be here. But plug and play, we need to reset expectations. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Interesting comments, Yago. We are almost out of time, but we do want to go to Ildiko and get some quick comments from Ildiko. Ildiko.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I would really love to see standardization activities and open source converging a little bit closer together. I apologize, I don't remember who mentioned the term de facto standard. An open source project, when it gets popular and widely used, then those interfaces and APIs practically become sort of de facto standards. And I think the key takeaway from this really is that it is one thing, and it is important to document the interfaces that are needed and used for interoperability. But the other area is that in open source, you have the software, you're able to take it and test it, and you can't just, so it's not just the open source code that you can take, but you can also take all the test suites that the communities are working on. Like I mentioned, OpenStack, where there's another project that we are supporting called Starling X. They are running in telco data centers, and they are all very thoroughly tested infrastructure software projects. And I think that really is key in the open source ecosystem, that you're working together on solutions, innovation, but you're also working together on testing and improving, increasing security, and conformance testing, integration testing, all those kind of activities that are happening in this ecosystem. And it's not just telcos who are testing these software components, but all kinds of other companies in other industry segments. So a lot of problems are being pointed out as you go. Yeah. So there is a lot of advantage to that. And when it comes to interoperability, I will just repeat myself bluntly and say that the business model has to change. If vendor lock-in is what everybody's making money on, we will never have interoperability.
Ildiko, thank you very much indeed. Yes, business models have to change, reset expectations. Any final quick comments, a few second comments from our guests? Otherwise, we're going to head towards the end of the session. Everyone wants to leave the session, but you're not leaving before we take a look at the poll, even though there's one response missing from it. So please, before we wrap it up for today, it is poll time. Let's bring up the 7 possibilities. That one we're looking at here. So it looks to me, with my dodgy eyes, like reduction in total cost of ownership, accelerated time to market for new functions and services are amongst the very popular ones there. And there's not much appetite for creating more national vendor champions. Thank goodness for that. Right. Yes, indeed. We do need to leave it there. This does bring to a close day 1 of DSP Leaders World Forum 2022. So first of all, we're going to say goodbye to our guests, and I've got some announcements for you after that. But first of all, thank you very much to our online audience who've been watching patiently all day and sending in their questions. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll be back and we'll see you tomorrow morning, because we've still got some excellent sessions for you. The stream's going to start just after 9 a.m. UK time, so hope to see you then. Right, that is the end of our live stream, which just leaves all of us here in the room. So we'll tell you what, round of applause first of all for our guests on stage, and also for Ildiko there from Seattle, didn't make it. Thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much. Got to say, we are going to be gathering upstairs, those of us here in Monarch Room 1, which is at the top of the escalators. 2 flights of escalators, almost by the entrance to the conference wing. We're going to be gathering at about 6:45, 7 p.m. approximately. That's in about an hour or so's time, just enough time for a quick splash and dash. Evening festivities have been arranged by our sponsor, TelcoDR. Thank you very much. A big thanks in advance to Danielle and her team. We have all sorts of goodies for you before we open our doors to our special event. So I shall say no more. Don't forget the charity pinball tournament, which I'm sure we'll hear Led Zeppelin crank up a tune or two in a minute at the back of the room. Please, please, please. Donate, 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 and let's make sure we have a new champion this year, eh, Neil? And a final reminder that tomorrow morning starts about 9 a.m. thereabouts. We will be providing extra strong coffee. We'll let our colleagues in the back corner know to give a triple shot of espresso with every drink. And for those of us who have to leave us now, thank you very much for today. You're going to miss out on a great night, but never mind. Thanks for being part of the forum. We do appreciate it, and we hope you enjoyed yourselves. Okay, that's it from me. See you in about an hour's time. Thank you very much.